She hadn't planned to hide anyone that night. Martha Langston was in the middle of churning butter when the knock came. Quick, sharp, panicked. Her hands froze. No one knocked like that unless they were desperate or dangerous. The moon was thin, the air damp with spring, and her husband Jacob was still 2 fields over mending fence wire. She opened the door anyway. The man on the porch wasn't from town. That much she knew at once. His eyes were wild, scanning the dark like it might swallow him. Clothes torn, skin caked in mud and sweat, barefoot. He didn't speak, just looked at her, chest heaving, ribs sharp under the fabric. She saw the chain marks on his wrists before he could hide them behind his back. She stepped aside. He didn't thank her. He didn't look back. He stumbled into the kitchen and collapsed near the hearth. Martha closed the door, locked it, then stood there, breath held, heart pounding like it might knock the walls down. She had just committed a crime, the kind they hanged you for. The man's name was Elijah. He whispered it to her an hour later, voice barely audible through cracked lips. He didn't ask for help, didn't beg, just answered when she asked. Where he came from, how far he'd run, how long he'd been without food. 8 days, maybe 9. He'd lost count after the second night of dogs chasing him through the swamp. Martha didn't tell Jacob until morning. He found her in the barn, standing over the trapdoor beneath the hay. Her face pale, her voice quiet. "There's someone here," she said, "and we're not sending him back." Jacob didn't ask who. He just looked into her eyes for a long time. Then he nodded. For 3 days, Elijah stayed beneath the barn, wrapped in old blankets, fed with whatever they could spare. He didn't speak much. But each night, Martha would sit by the trapdoor and leave a lamp burning nearby. A silent promise. You're not alone. But word travels faster than footsteps in a town that feeds on secrets. By the 5th day, Sheriff Collins arrived. Dust trailed behind his horse like a ghost chasing him through the wheat. He didn't dismount, just sat high in the saddle, eyes cold, jaw tight. "Morning, Miss Langston," he said. Martha stepped out onto the porch. Jacob appeared behind her. "You seen anything strange lately?" the sheriff asked. "Anyone passing through?" "No," Jacob said. The sheriff's eyes moved to Martha. "You sure?" She met his gaze, said nothing. Collins tipped his hat, smiled like a man who already knew the answer. "Let me know if that changes." He turned his horse and rode off, leaving dust and something colder behind. That night, they moved Elijah deeper into the woods. There was an old hunting shack Jacob had built years ago, half collapsed but still standing. It wasn't safe, but it was distance. "We'll bring food," Martha said. Elijah didn't argue. He didn't say goodbye either. At dawn, smoke rose over the fields. Martha was the first to see it, a black column clawing at the sky. She ran barefoot, heart slamming, dress torn by thorns. When she reached the barn, it was already engulfed. Flames twisted through the roof, splintering beams like matchsticks. Chickens screeched. The cow thrashed in the stall until Jacob cut the rope and slapped it free. They stood there together, helpless, watching everything burn. No one came to help. No neighbors. No townsfolk. Just the sheriff, watching from the ridge, hand resting on his rifle. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They buried what remained the next day. Ashes where hay used to be. Bent metal tools warped by heat. A single iron horseshoe half melted near the doorframe. The barn had stood for over 20 years, built by Jacob's father, expanded by Jacob himself. It wasn't just a building. It was memory, labor, history, all reduced to soot. Martha didn't cry. She carried water from the well. She spread buckets across the smoking earth. Her hands blistered. Her face stayed blank. Grief would come later, if there was room for it. That night, she sat at the edge of their field and watched the tree line. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she hoped to see Elijah again. Maybe she feared the sheriff might come back. She watched the stars come out and counted each one like a prayer she didn't know how to say. Jacob joined her without a word. They didn't speak of what had happened. Not directly. But when she reached for his hand, he held it tight. And when she whispered, "It's not over," he nodded once. 3 days passed before they dared to go to the shack. Martha carried bread and dried meat in a cloth bundle. Jacob brought a small tin of boiled herbs, something for the wound Elijah had hidden until the last visit. They moved through the woods quietly, avoiding the old game trail the sheriff's men might still be watching. When they reached the shack, it looked abandoned. Door half open, smoke long gone from the old chimney. Martha stepped inside first. Elijah was curled in the corner, breathing shallow, fevered. She dropped to her knees and pressed the cloth to his forehead. "You should have signaled." He shook his head. Didn't want to risk it. Jacob crouched beside them. "You're burning up." Elijah opened his eyes, barely slits, and said, "It was worth it." Martha paused. "What was?" He looked at her, and there was something in his gaze that made her chest ache, seeing someone open a door. They stayed the night. Jacob kept watch outside. Martha crushed herbs and wrapped Elijah's arm. She hummed softly. Not a song, but something close. A rhythm, born from silence and breath. In the morning, Elijah was stronger. He sat upright, ate slowly, asked no questions, gave no details. But before they left, he reached for Martha's hand and held it gently between his. "You knew what it would cost," he said, "and you did it anyway." She didn't respond. Words would have broken the moment. They returned 3 more times over the next week. Always careful, always quiet. The shack became safer than their farm. No one dared follow them that deep. Not yet. But then the letters came, left nailed to their door. Crude script. No names. Traitor's wife. God sees. You'll burn next. Jacob took them down without comment. Martha burned them in the stove. The air inside the house grew colder despite the fire. Then came the night the dog was poisoned. Barkley had been with them for 9 years, loyal, quiet. Slept at the porch like he was part of the wood itself. They found him in the morning, body twisted in the grass, foam at his mouth. Martha dropped to her knees and buried her face in his fur. It smelled of apples, from the piece she'd given him the night before. They buried him behind the barn's ashes. No tears, not yet, just silence. Later that night, Jacob stood by the fireplace holding his grandfather's rifle. He didn't say where he was going. Martha didn't ask. She only stood, crossed the room, and took the rifle from his hands. "Not like this," she said. His jaw clenched. His eyes shone with rage he didn't have words for. But he stepped back. Outside, the wind picked up. The wheat fields swayed like an ocean of gold under threat of storm. And still, no one spoke their names. No neighbors visited. No church letters arrived. Just isolation, thick and slow like syrup left too long in the sun. That was the real punishment, not the fire, the forgetting. Martha stopped going into town, not because she was afraid. That had passed. What lingered now was something colder. The weight of eyes that didn't blink, doors that didn't open, conversations that died when she entered. She could feel the judgment in silence louder than words. Jacob made the trips instead. Bought flour, repaired the wagon wheel, avoided names. No one spoke to him unless they had to, and when they did, it was clipped, polite, distant. He didn't complain. But each time he came back, he brought less of himself with him. One evening, Martha found a bullet casing on the porch. Just one, placed carefully by the door, like an offering or a warning. She didn't show it to Jacob. She buried it beneath the ash pile behind the barn skeleton. The next time they went to the shack, Elijah was gone. No trace, no footprints, no note. Just a piece of wood carved with a single symbol, a flame with a line through it. Martha held it for a long time before slipping it into her apron. "He made it out," she said. Jacob didn't reply. He looked around the woods like he expected someone to step out of them. They walked back in silence, the kind that stretches across more than a path, the kind that lives between people. A week passed, then 2. Spring crept in around the edges. Birds returned. The wheat pushed through thawed soil, but nothing grew the same way. The rhythm of the farm was broken. They moved through their days like sleepwalkers, hands doing what the mind no longer tracked. And then, just before sunset one day, the sheriff returned. This time he came on foot. No deputies, no show of force, just him, hat in hand, walking the path like it belonged to him. Martha stepped out to meet him. Jacob followed. Collins stopped a few feet from the porch. His face was weathered, his eyes tired. "You think it's over," he said. Martha didn't answer. "You think he's gone, and that means you're safe." Still, silence. The sheriff sighed, as if the weight of his own voice was too heavy. "You didn't have to lie. You didn't have to pick his side." Martha took a slow breath. "There wasn't a side." Collins laughed, not cruel, just bitter. "That's what makes it worse." He looked at Jacob. "You lost your barn. You're losing your name. How much more are you willing to give for someone who walked away without looking back?" Jacob spoke for the first time. "As much as it takes." The sheriff studied them both. "You won't be forgiven." Martha's voice was low. "We didn't ask to be." Collins nodded, almost respectfully. "Then I won't waste your time again." He turned and walked down the path. No threats, no raised voice. But as his figure vanished into the horizon, Martha felt the finality settle in her chest like a stone. They were done being warned. Now came the waiting. That night, they didn't light the lamp. They sat in the dark, listening to the creak of the house and the wind pressing against the windows. Every sound felt like it carried weight. Every moment stretched thin. But nothing came. Not that night. Not the next. The punishment was quieter now. The sheriff had done his part. The rest was up to the town, the land. 2 Sundays later, the church bell rang as usual, but the Langstons' names were not spoken during the service. No one mentioned their anniversary. No one nodded when they passed by on the road. And still, they endured. Each morning, Martha rose and baked bread. Jacob worked the fields. The house stayed clean. The fence was mended. The table set for 2. Because routine is resistance when the world tries to erase you. But the silence wore thin. One day, a young girl wandered up the path. 10, maybe 11. She carried a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. Her hair was pulled back with twine, and she didn't make eye contact. She set the bread on the porch and turned to leave. Martha stepped out. "What's your name?" The girl paused, then whispered, "My mother said you did the right thing." Then she ran. Jacob joined Martha on the porch. They didn't speak, but the silence felt different now. Not empty, not entirely. The bread was still warm. Martha sliced it slowly that afternoon, careful with each motion, as if the act of cutting it might undo whatever fragile thread had been woven by the girl's gesture. She didn't eat. She just placed the slices on a plate and stared at them until the sun fell low. Jacob said nothing. But that night, for the first time in weeks, he lit the oil lamp in the window. Not because anyone would see it, but because they might. The next day, another offering arrived. A basket of eggs. 6 of them, nestled in hay, clean and pale. No note, no messenger, just left on the porch before dawn. Martha didn't smile, but something in her hands moved softer as she carried them inside. Later that week, a neighbor passed by the property with his ox cart and didn't look away. Didn't wave, but didn't spit either. It felt like something, a breath, a shift. But kindness from the shadows was a different thing than courage in the light, and the sheriff hadn't forgotten. Collins returned one last time. He didn't ride up the road. He came from the woods, quiet, intentional. When Jacob spotted him from the field, he dropped the shovel and moved toward the house, heart climbing into his throat. Martha met them both on the porch. The sheriff held a folded paper in his hand. "I thought you should see this," he said. Jacob took it, read it. His jaw tightened. It was a decree from the county judge, authorizing a seizure of land in the event of ongoing civil disruptions. It wasn't written in bold letters. It didn't name them directly, but it didn't have to. Collins watched them. "I didn't ask for this, but I also didn't stop it." Martha looked at the sheriff's boots. Dusty, unpolished. "We won't leave," she said. "You might not have a choice. Then you might not like what happens." The wind shifted. A hawk circled above the barn's ashes. Collins sighed. "You think this means something. What you did. That it'll change anything." Martha's voice was low. "It already did." He didn't reply. He turned and walked back through the woods. They didn't see him again, but what followed wasn't silence. It was motion. That same week, the pastor from town came by. Not with a sermon, not with condemnation, but with nails and a hammer. He helped Jacob repair the gate. He said nothing of the barn, of the man who had once been hidden in the dark below it. But as he left, he placed a small cross made of 2 twigs tied with twine on their windowsill. Others followed. One brought seeds, another left wool. A widow brought candles. And slowly, the house began to fill again, not with noise, but with signs. Echoes of a community quietly shifting back toward itself. But it never spoke of what had been done, never honored it aloud. That winter, Martha gave birth to a stillborn child. There had been no midwife, no churchwoman to boil cloth or hold her hand. Just her and Jacob and the pain that arrived too soon and lasted too long. They buried the baby beside the fence, under a cottonwood tree that hadn't bloomed in years. Jacob carved no name into the wood, but Martha wrapped a strip of cloth around the trunk, the same one that had carried the bread from the little girl months before. It stayed there through snow and wind. When spring came, the cottonwood bloomed, for the first time in over a decade. They didn't speak of it, just stood by the grave in silence. And when they turned to go, they found a stone had been placed at the foot of the tree, smooth, carved with a single word, seen. No one claimed it, but Martha ran her fingers over the letters until her fingertips ached. That evening, she sat in her kitchen, bread rising in the oven, light fading through the cracks of the shuttered windows. Jacob trimmed the lantern wick. There was still no justice, no apology, no restoration, but there was breath, and there was bread. And somewhere in the woods, a man was free. The field grew quiet that summer, not barren, just quiet. Martha still rose before dawn. She still washed the same floorboards, baked the same bread, lit the same lamp each night. But everything she touched held the echo of something not there. The child, the barn, the man with the chains on his wrists who never came back. The world hadn't collapsed. It had just gone still in the wrong places. One morning, as Martha was hanging clothes, she saw someone standing beyond the fence. Not close, not threatening, just there, watching. A boy, maybe 15, brown-skinned, barefoot, his shirt torn at the collar. She didn't speak, just held the sheet in her hands, waiting. He didn't move. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out a cloth. Inside it was a small wooden carving of a mother holding a child. Crude, but precise. Real. He crossed the fence, left it on the porch, and walked away without a word. Martha didn't call after him. She placed the carving on the mantel beside the oil lamp. That night, when Jacob sat beside her, he didn't ask where it came from. They both knew. A few weeks later, the wheat was ready. Jacob harvested alone now. The neighbors didn't come with carts or lend their sons like they used to. But the earth had not withheld its promise. It gave, quietly, grudgingly, but it gave. And as he worked, Martha watched from the porch, the wind tugging at her dress. She remembered the first year she'd come to the farm, barely 20, still unsure of herself, watching Jacob teach her how to measure seed by weight, not guesswork, how to feel the soil between her fingers and know when it was time to trust. She remembered that same man, standing in the ruins of their barn, eyes hollow, refusing to ask for help. He hadn't asked because he didn't think anyone would come, and for a long time, they hadn't. But something had shifted now. Not in the town, not fully, but in the land, in the way things responded. The cottonwood tree bloomed again. The chickens returned on their own, nesting in corners of the house they weren't supposed to. One left a single egg on the windowsill. Martha laughed when she saw it, short and sharp, as if her ribs didn't know how to handle the sound. Then, just before dusk, someone knocked. It wasn't the sheriff, not a child, not a stranger. It was a woman, tall, shoulders square, skin dark as the river silt. Her hands were calloused, her eyes full. Martha stepped outside. The woman didn't speak. She reached into her satchel and brought out a folded piece of cloth. Inside was a letter, handwritten in careful ink. Martha unfolded it slowly. The words were few. He made it. Alabama. Married. 3 children. He tells them a story every night. About a door. Martha didn't speak. Her hands trembled. The woman handed her a bundle. Inside, fresh okra, dried peaches, a jar of molasses sealed with wax. "For the baby," she said softly. "I heard." Martha nodded, her throat tight. The woman stepped forward, placed a hand over Martha's heart, then turned and walked down the road. She left footprints in the dust that didn't last more than a few hours, but long enough. That evening, Jacob found Martha kneeling beside the tree. The cloth strip tied months ago had frayed in the wind. She retied it, this time with the letter knotted inside. They didn't speak of the visitor. Some things you don't retell, you carry them. As the days shortened and the air thickened with the scent of hay and smoke, the town remained distant, but not hostile, just cautious, like a dog that had barked too long and now watched instead. The sheriff was gone, transferred, retired. No one knew for sure. His name wasn't mentioned anymore, but his shadow lingered in the way people lowered their voices near the Langstons' property, in the way they turned when Jacob walked into the general store. And still, the offerings came. Not often, but steady. A sack of cornmeal left in the wagon, a loaf of rye on the porch, a jar of preserves tucked into the woodshed, wrapped in newspaper clippings. All anonymous, all understood. Winter returned quieter than the last. No frost cracked the windows. No letters nailed to the door. The threats had faded, not because forgiveness had bloomed, but because something stronger than hate had taken root. Distance, a reverence too ashamed to speak. Martha moved slower now. The cold clung longer to her bones, and the ache in her joints made itself known before dawn. But the fire still burned each morning, the bread still rose, and when she walked to the cottonwood, she still tied cloth to the branches. She never reused one. Each was new. Each was left to the wind. Jacob built a small shed where the barn had once stood. He didn't call it that. Never used the word replace, just called it a shelter for what still needs holding. Inside, he stored tools, dried herbs, preserved seeds. The carving of the mother and child sat on the shelf in the corner. Then came the child. A girl this time, not theirs. Someone else's. She came barefoot through the fog, no more than 6 years old, her eyes rimmed in soot, her clothes stiff with ash. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She only walked up the path and sat on the porch like she belonged there. Martha found her at sunrise. She didn't ask where the girl came from. There was a burn mark on her ankle, a cut across her cheek, but her spine was straight, her jaw set. Someone had survived inside her long before her legs brought her here. Martha brought water, Jacob brought bread. The girl ate in silence, drank in gulps, then laid her head against the porch beam and slept. They let her. That night they made a bed near the stove. When the girl woke, she said one word, May. It wasn't a question. It wasn't her name. It was the name of someone she had lost. Martha nodded. The girl stayed. No law came looking, no notice posted in town. Only footprints again, in the snow, leading toward the Langstons' home. Sometimes alone, sometimes two at a time, sometimes dragging behind. Small, careful, desperate. Martha never turned anyone away. The shed grew crowded. New faces, different names. Some stayed a night, others stayed through thaw. Jacob built bunks. He added a stove. He learned to boil cloth and stitch with steady hands. The house was never loud, but it was never empty again. Years passed. Hair turned white. The field changed. New patterns. New rhythm. Some of the children came back grown. One brought a book, worn at the edges, opened it on the kitchen table, and read aloud. Stories from beyond the hills. Stories of men who had vanished from chains into freedom. And in the spaces between the sentences, the name Elijah appeared. Not shouted, not centered, but there. Jacob looked at Martha across the table. She only nodded once. The cottonwood tree was larger now. Its roots tangled deep, wide, unmoving. Each spring, new cloths appeared. Not just Martha's. Some were bright, others frayed. Some written on. Others dyed with colors not found in any field nearby. One was braided hair. Another was a sliver of rope, cut clean. None were explained. They didn't need to be. Martha's hands no longer kneaded dough with the same strength. But the warmth in the kitchen never faded. A younger woman, once a child who had stayed 2 winters, now stirred the pot, cleaned the linens, swept the floor. She called Martha Mrs., but her hands moved like they were part of the home itself. Then, one morning, Martha didn't rise. She stayed beneath the quilt Jacob had stitched from cloth pieces left behind over the years. He sat beside her, all day. No one knocked. No one needed to. That night, he lit the oil lamp and placed it on the windowsill. It burned until dawn. After Martha passed, Jacob didn't speak for nearly a week. He worked, he moved, he cooked, but no words came. The house didn't echo. It absorbed the silence, held it gently, like it understood grief had its own breath. The lamp stayed lit every night, not as vigil, not as tribute, just because that's what she had done. That was the rhythm of her. On the 7th day, a small group arrived. 3 men, 2 women, 1 child. They didn't knock. They stood quietly at the edge of the fence, heads bowed. When Jacob stepped onto the porch, the oldest among them approached and held out a box. Wooden, hand-carved, polished with oil. Inside, scraps of cloth, threads from dresses long gone, a ring made from braided horsehair, a small cross, chipped at the corner, a button, a thimble, a bead of red glass, each piece once forgotten, now returned. She kept us all, the man said softly, without asking for anything. Jacob took the box. He didn't speak. That night, he placed it on the table, opened. By morning, 2 candles had been lit beside it. He didn't know who had done it, and he didn't blow them out. Spring arrived early that year. The cottonwood bloomed in full white. The wind carried the scent of new roots and something else, old prayers stirring in soil. Children came more often now. Not all of them stayed. Some only wanted to see the place, to touch the porch, to place their hands on the fence. Some wept without knowing why. Some laughed like the world had always been this kind. One child, no more than 5, pointed to the cottonwood and asked if it was the tree where people told the truth. Jacob didn't know what to say, so he said yes. The house began to change again. The corners filled with things that weren't bought. Woven baskets, wooden spoons, drawings, letters. Some written in languages Jacob couldn't read. One was just a name, Isaac. That same day, a woman arrived with her son. She didn't stay long, but she left behind a painted cloth to cover the mantel, deep indigo, stitched with a sun, a river, and a woman's hand reaching down. The next morning, the hand was gone, replaced by 2, side by side. Years passed. Jacob moved slower. His back bent more each spring. He let the younger ones plant the seeds, sweep the porch, split the wood. But he always tied the first cloth to the tree, every spring, even when his fingers ached too much to knot the fabric. Someone always helped. He never had to ask. When he passed, there was no funeral. The news didn't spread through bells or bulletins. But by morning, the path was full. No carriages, just feet. One by one they came, some with stones, others with bread. A few carried nothing, only memory. They stood beneath the cottonwood and sang no songs. They only listened. And in that stillness, a new rhythm began.